The tray was already in front of him when he noticed it. A faint smell, slightly sour. He didn't touch it. The flight attendant was still standing there, waiting just long enough to be acknowledged, not patient, just watching. He looked up calm. "There's something wrong with this." She didn't check, didn't lean in, didn't hesitate. "It's the same meal everyone is getting," she said, already turning away. A few passengers nearby glanced over. One shrugged, another nodded as if that settled it. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't call her back. He just pushed the tray slightly forward, enough to show he wouldn't eat it. That's when she stopped walking, turned back, looked at the untouched food, then at him, and made the decision. "Sir, if you're going to refuse service, I'll have to report this as disruptive behavior." A pause, not loud, not dramatic, but final. People stopped pretending not to listen. He sat still, didn't argue, didn't explain. And no one realized they had just locked in a decision that should have been corrected in the first 10 seconds. The cabin was quiet in the way it usually is once service begins. Not silent, just controlled. Low voices, the soft clink of plastic against trays, overhead air humming in a steady, forgettable rhythm. People weren't paying attention anymore. That part of the flight had passed. The part where anything unusual would stand out. He was seated by the window, tray table down. Hands resting loosely, not waiting, not impatient, just still. When the cart reached his row, it slowed slightly. The flight attendant didn't greet him the way she had the others. No smile, no pause, just a quick glance at the seat number, then the tray was already in motion, set down in front of him with a small, controlled drop, not aggressive, but not careful either. "Chicken," she said, flat, informational, already moving. He didn't respond immediately. Not because he hadn't heard, but because something felt off before he even looked down. A smell, faint, not strong enough to turn heads, not strong enough to draw attention, but enough. He looked at the tray. The seal on the main dish was slightly lifted on one corner, not open, not fully, just enough to break the line. He leaned in slightly. The smell confirmed it. Sour, subtle, but wrong. Around him, no one noticed. A man across the aisle was already halfway through his meal. Someone behind him asked for extra bread. A child, too, rose back, complained quietly about juice. Normal, everything was normal except this. He didn't touch the tray, didn't lift the lid, didn't call out. He simply looked up. The flight attendant was still within reach, handing a drink to the passenger beside him. He waited, not long, just enough for her to finish and turn back. "There's something wrong with this," he said. His voice didn't carry. It didn't need to. She looked at him. Then at the tray, but she didn't step closer, didn't lean in, didn't check. "It's the same meal everyone is getting," she replied, immediate, practiced, as if the answer had already been decided before the question finished. He held her gaze for a moment, not challenging, just steady. "It smells off." A small pause, not from him, from her, barely there, then it passed. "It's standard catering, sir." Same tone, same distance, no adjustment, no curiosity. She turned slightly, already shifting her attention away. The conversation for her was over. Across the aisle, someone glanced over briefly, then looked back down. No one said anything. He didn't either. He looked at the tray again. Same lifted corner, same faint smell. Nothing had changed, except now it had been dismissed. He placed his fingers on the edge of the tray, not to pull it closer, but to move it away. Just a few inches, enough to create space between him and the food. A quiet refusal. Not announced, just visible. The motion was small, but it was enough. The flight attendant noticed. She had already taken 2 steps forward, then stopped. Something in the movement behind her had shifted. She turned back, looked at the tray, then at him. The tray slightly pushed forward, untouched, deliberate. There was a brief silence between them, not uncomfortable yet, just noticeable. "Sir," she said, her tone firmer now, "is there a problem with your meal?" He didn't change posture. Didn't raise his voice. "I already told you." Another pause, longer this time. A passenger in the next row leaned slightly into the aisle, pretending to adjust something just to listen. The man across the aisle slowed his eating, small shifts, nothing obvious, but attention was building. She glanced at the tray again, still didn't step closer, didn't inspect it. Her jaw tightened slightly, not in anger, just in decision. Then she straightened. "If you're refusing service," she said, "I'll need to note that." The words landed differently than expected. Not loud, not aggressive, but structured, official. He blinked once, not surprised, just registering. "I'm not refusing," he said. "I'm telling you it's spoiled." The word hung there for a second, spoiled. It didn't spread, didn't trigger anything immediate, but it changed the shape of the moment. A woman 2 seats back looked up. Someone else shifted in their seat. The flight attendant didn't respond right away, not because she was considering it, because she was choosing how to frame it. Then, "It's not," she said, flat, closed, final. Another small silence followed, thicker now, less neutral. He looked at her, not frustrated, not trying to convince, just watching, as if giving her one more chance to reconsider something simple. She didn't take it. Instead, she nodded once, to herself more than to him. Then, "All right," she said, "I'll report this." There was a subtle shift in the air, not dramatic, but irreversible. A line had been drawn. And it wasn't about the food anymore. It was about procedure, control, interpretation. The tray remained where it was, untouched, still slightly open, still carrying that faint, sour edge no one else had fully acknowledged yet. He leaned back in his seat, hands returning to rest. Calm, still. Around him people went back to their meals, or pretended to. But the rhythm had changed, slightly off, slightly aware. And in the space between what was said and what wasn't checked, a simple decision had already settled into place. One that could have been corrected in a few seconds, but wasn't. The cart moved forward, not quickly, not slowly, just enough to signal that service hadn't stopped, but something had shifted, not visibly. Just in the way people looked up for a second longer than necessary, then looked away. The tray in front of him stayed where it was, untouched. The smell didn't spread far, but it stayed close, persistent, quiet. The flight attendant didn't return, not immediately. Instead, she leaned slightly toward her colleague near the galley curtain. Their voices were low, controlled, professional, but their posture gave it away, shoulders angled in, heads tilted just enough to keep the conversation contained. Still, a few words carried. "Refusing. Said it's spoiled. Didn't even open it." A short pause. Her colleague glanced briefly toward his row. Not directly at him, just enough to locate the situation. "Did you check it?" the colleague asked. It wasn't confrontational, just routine, a question that could still change something. The first attendant shook her head once, subtle, "No, it's standard." Another pause. The colleague didn't respond immediately. That half-second lingered, not doubt, just hesitation. Then it passed. "Okay," she said quietly, "just note it." And that was it. The moment where it could have ended, closed, corrected, ignored. Instead, it was labeled. The first attendant straightened, smoothed the front of her uniform slightly, an unconscious reset. Then she reached into the side pocket of the cart, pulled out a small notepad, not large, not official looking, but enough. She wrote something down, brief, efficient, didn't look back at the tray, didn't step closer, just wrote. From 2 rows ahead, someone leaned slightly into the aisle. "Everything okay?" he asked, not really expecting an answer. The attendant responded without turning fully. "Yes, sir, just a service note." Neutral, contained. That seemed to satisfy him. He leaned back. Across the aisle, the man who had slowed his eating earlier picked up his fork again, but slower this time, watching without looking like he was watching. The label had already begun to settle. Service issue. Passenger refusal. Nothing unusual, nothing worth questioning. He remained still. Hands folded loosely now. Eyes not on the tray anymore, but not avoiding it either. Just aware. A few minutes passed, not long enough to forget, long enough to normalize. The second attendant approached his row. Different posture, more measured, less cert. She stopped beside his seat, looked at him first, then at the tray. This time there was a slight lean forward, not enough to inspect, but enough to acknowledge its presence. "Sir," she said quietly, "I understand there's an issue with your meal." Her tone was softer. Not sympathetic, just less decided. He nodded once. "It's off." She hesitated, just briefly, then looked back toward the galley where the first attendant was now stacking empty cups. Watching without appearing to, the second attendant straightened. "I've been told you refused service." There it was, not a question, a confirmation. He didn't react immediately, didn't correct her right away. He just looked at her, steady. "I didn't refuse," he said. "I asked you to check it." Another pause. Longer this time. She glanced at the tray again, the lifted seal still visible, still slightly open. That should have been enough, a small detail, easy to verify, easy to resolve. But now it wasn't just about the tray, it was about alignment, between crew, between decisions already made. She exhaled quietly, almost inaudible. Then, all right, she said, but I'll need to follow what's been noted. Careful wording, not dismissive, but not corrective either. A middle ground that didn't actually exist. Behind her, the first attendant turned slightly, not fully, just enough to see, waiting not for the truth but for consistency. The second attendant nodded once to him, then stepped back, no inspection, no correction, just acceptance. The moment closed again, another chance missed without resistance. A passenger behind him shifted forward slightly, lowered their voice to someone beside them. "He's making it a bigger deal than it is." A whisper, not meant to carry, but it did, just enough. Another voice responded quietly. They all got the same thing. Agreement. Simple, comfortable, no one challenged it because it made sense, because it was easier, because the alternative required someone to stop the process and look closer. No one wanted that, not here, not now. The tray remained unchanged, but now it had something else attached to it, a label, not spoken loudly, but settled, refusal, difficult, non-compliant. He leaned back slightly, eyes forward now, not engaging. Not withdrawing, just present. The smell lingered, subtle, persistent, ignored, and somewhere between a question that wasn't checked and an answer that wasn't challenged, a small decision had taken shape. Not loud, not obvious, but firm enough to start moving everything else in the wrong direction. By the time the cart reached the last rows, the cabin had settled again, at least on the surface. People resumed eating. Conversations picked back up in low tones. The routine tried to restore itself. But not completely. There was a small disruption now, unspoken but present. It stayed centered around one row, one tray, one quiet refusal that had already been redefined. The first flight attendant didn't return. Instead, a different presence approached. Slower steps, more deliberate. A senior crew member, not older by much but carried differently, less reactive, more cert. She stopped beside his row without introducing herself. Her attention went first to the tray, then to him. Brief pause, just enough to assess. "I understand there's been an issue," she said. Her tone was even, not dismissive, but not open either. He didn't respond immediately. He let the moment sit. Then, "There is." No explanation, no added detail, just acknowledgement. She nodded once, then looked at the tray again, the seal still slightly lifted, the position still pushed forward, untouched, a detail that could still shift everything. But she didn't reach for it, didn't lean in, didn't ask to inspect. Instead, she straightened slightly. "I've been informed that you declined your meal and expressed dissatisfaction." The wording was precise, carefully arranged. He watched her, calm. "I asked for it to be checked," he said. A small silence followed. A man across the aisle paused mid-bite again. This time he didn't pretend as much. Others were listening too, not directly, but enough. The senior attendant held his gaze for a second longer than necessary, then nodded again, slow, measured. "I see," she said. But nothing in her posture changed. No shift toward the tray, no signal of reconsideration, just acknowledgement without movement. Behind her, the first attendant stood near the galley, not intervening, just present, watching. The alignment was already there. It didn't need to be reinforced. It just needed to continue. The senior attendant folded her hands lightly in front of her, a composed stance, controlled. "Sir, we serve standardized meals on this route," she said. "There haven't been any other reports." A statement, not evidence, but it sounded sufficient. It sounded complete. A woman 2 rows ahead turned slightly, just enough to be seen agreeing, subtle but visible. Another passenger shifted in their seat, nodded once. Small signals, building. He glanced briefly around, not searching for support, just noticing, then back to her. "That doesn't change what's in front of me." His voice remained level, not defensive, not challenging, just direct. Another pause. This one lingered longer, not because of uncertainty, but because of observation. The senior attendant was aware now, of the eyes, of the silence, of the moment balancing between 2 outcomes, one simple, one procedural. She could still choose, check the tray, lean in, confirm or deny, end it quietly. Instead, she shifted her weight slightly. A decision made without being announced. "If you're unwilling to accept the meal as provided," she said, "we'll have to proceed accordingly." Phrasing landed heavier than before, more structured, less flexible, a step further from the original issue. He didn't respond right away, didn't correct her wording, didn't argue the framing. He just looked at her, for a second longer than before, not to challenge but to give space. Space for her to notice what she hadn't. The tray, the seal, the smell that stayed close but constant. She didn't take it. Behind them, someone spoke quietly. "He's just being difficult," another voice answered. They already told him it's fine. The tone wasn't aggressive, just certain, comfortable in its assumption, the kind that spreads easily in confined spaces. The senior attendant heard it, didn't react, but it settled something, not the truth, just the direction. She nodded once more, this time final. "I'll need to document this as a refusal," she said. There was a subtle shift in the air, a line crossing into something more fixed. A man in the aisle seat ahead exhaled softly, relieved almost, as if the situation had now been properly categorized. Contained, explained, the senior attendant reached for a small device clipped at her waist, notepad replaced by something more official. She tapped the screen, entered a few words, didn't ask for his name, didn't ask for clarification. The version of events had already been selected. He remained still, hands resting again, eyes forward now, not following her movements, not reacting to the escalation, just present. The tray sat between them, still untouched, still slightly open, still carrying that quiet detail no one had chosen to verify. A flight attendant passed behind, pushing the empty cart back toward the galley. The aisle cleared, the space widened. But the tension didn't move with it. It stayed, condensed around a decision that had just been reinforced publicly, without resistance, without correction. The senior attendant finished typing, looked at him one last time, not unkind, but settled, then stepped away. The moment closed. Not loudly, not dramatically, just sealed. And now it wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was a shared version of events, accepted, repeated, and quietly supported by the people watching because it felt easier than questioning something that should have already been checked. The cabin felt tighter now, not physically, just in the way sound carried, quieter conversations, shorter sentences, more pauses than before. Service had moved on, but the rhythm hadn't fully recovered. It stayed uneven, like something small had been pushed out of place and never reset. The tray in front of him hadn't moved, still slightly forward, still untouched. The edge of the seal had lifted a little more now, not enough to open, just enough to make it harder to ignore. The smell was still there, faint, but no longer subtle to anyone paying attention. A passenger across the aisle shifted in his seat. He looked down at his own tray, then, almost without thinking, leaned a little closer to it. A brief pause. A small frown. Then he sat back again, didn't say anything, didn't call anyone over, just adjusted his posture and kept eating. That was the first signal. Quiet, unclaimed, ignored. A few rows behind, someone pressed the call button. A soft chime broke through the cabin. One of the attendants responded, different from before, younger, less certain in her movements. She leaned in toward the passenger who had called her. "What is it?" she asked softly. The passenger tilted their head slightly toward their tray. "Is this supposed to smell like that?" Not loud, not accusing, just uncertain. The attendant hesitated, not long, but long enough to feel it. She leaned down slightly, closer than the others had, but still not enough, just within distance. A breath in, a small shift in her expression, then she straightened quickly. "It's normal," she said, too fast, too clean, as if the answer had been decided before the check. The passenger looked at her for a second, then nodded, not convinced, just accepting, because it was easier, because questioning it further would mean stopping everything again, and no one wanted to do that, not after what had already happened. The attendant moved on, but slower now, less certain. Her eyes flicked once toward his row, then away. She didn't stop, didn't intervene, just carried the moment with her. Unresolved. Up ahead near the galley, the first flight attendant was organizing used trays, stacking them neatly. Efficient. Controlled, but her movements were slightly sharper now, less fluid. A small tension had settled into her shoulders. She noticed the younger attendant approaching. Their eyes met briefly. A silent exchange, A question, an answer, too quick to read. Then both looked away. Nothing was said, because saying something would require revisiting what had already been decided. And that wasn't happening, not anymore. Back in his row, he hadn't moved, not since the last interaction. His posture remained the same, calm. Still observing not the tray, but the reactions around it. Someone behind him leaned slightly forward, lowering their voice. "I think mine smells too." A pause. The person next to them responded quietly. "Don't start." Not dismissive, just cautious. The kind of caution that comes when something feels off, but acknowledging it might make things worse. The first passenger leaned back again, didn't push it. The moment faded, but it didn't disappear. It lingered, just under the surface. The senior attendant reappeared briefly at the front of the cabin. She wasn't looking for him, not directly, but her attention moved through the rows in a slower sweep this time. Less routine, more aware. Her eyes passed over his tray, paused just for a fraction longer than before. That should have been enough. That small pause, that slight awareness. It could have shifted everything. She could have stepped forward, picked it up, checked it, ended it. Instead, she continued walking. The pause meant nothing if it didn't lead to action. And it didn't. Behind her, the curtain to the galley moved slightly. A glimpse of the storage area, metal compartments, stacked containers, one of them slightly open. Unnoticed or ignored, the air carried a faint trace from that direction, not strong, not obvious, but connected. Another signal, small, unconfirmed, left alone. The plane continued forward, steady, uninterrupted. At cruising altitude, nothing felt urgent. Nothing demanded correction. Mistakes didn't feel like mistakes up here. They felt like decisions, stable, locked in. And the longer they stayed unchallenged, the harder they became to undo. Back in his seat, he shifted slightly, not uncomfortable, just adjusting. His hand moved to the edge of the tray again, not to pull it closer, not to push it away, just to feel its presence, still there, still wrong, still unacknowledged. He let his hand rest there for a moment, then pulled it back. No reaction. No escalation, just patience. Around him, the cabin continued to move, but differently now, more careful, more aware. People weren't just eating anymore. They were noticing, comparing, quietly checking their own trays without making it obvious. And each small realization, each brief hesitation, each glance that lasted a second too long added weight to something that should have been resolved when the first concern was raised. But wasn't. And now it was no longer just one tray. It was a pattern. Still unspoken, still avoidable, but only if someone chose to see it. No one did. The cabin didn't return to normal. It adjusted. That was different. People still ate. Trays still moved. Cups were collected, but now everything happened with a slight delay, a fraction slower than before, as if each action needed a second check, not of the process, but of what it might reveal. The tray in front of him remained where it had been, untouched. The lifted seal had curled a little more at the edge. Small detail, more visible now. The smell hadn't spread far, but it had settled into the immediate space around him, close enough for anyone passing by to notice. If they allowed themselves to, most didn't, not directly, but their movements changed. Subtle detours in the aisle, shortened pauses near his row, a quiet awareness that didn't fully form into action. Near the middle of the cabin, a phone appeared, not raised high, not obvious, just held low, angled slightly. Recording. At first, it wasn't clear what exactly it was capturing. The tray, the attendants, him, maybe all of it. The person holding it didn't look around, didn't draw attention. They just kept the device steady, observing through a screen instead of directly. That made it easier, safer. A few seats ahead, someone noticed. A glance, then another. No one said anything. But now the situation had a witness that wouldn't forget. Up front near the galley, the first flight attendant stood with the senior crew member. Their conversation was quieter than before, more contained, less open. "Still refusing? Others are starting to ask? We already noted it." The senior attendant's posture was different now, less certain, not visibly, but in the way she held still between sentences, as if something had shifted slightly, not enough to change direction, but enough to register. She looked down the aisle, toward his row. Held the gaze for a second, then looked back. "We can't reverse it now," she said, not firm, not defensive, just stated, a line that had already been crossed and acknowledged. The first attendant nodded, quick, almost relieved. Clarity mattered more than correctness now. It simplified things. Behind them, the younger attendant moved slower than before. Her eyes passed over trays more carefully. But she didn't stop, didn't check, didn't intervene. Observation without action. A pattern forming. Back in his row, the man across the aisle had stopped eating completely. His tray sat half-finished. He leaned back, looked at it, then away, then back again. A quiet conflict, not about hunger, about doubt. He caught the eye of someone 2 rows ahead, a brief exchange, unspoken but understood. Something wasn't right. Still, no one said it out loud, not yet. The phone near the middle shifted slightly, adjusted angle, now capturing the aisle, the attendants, the movement between rows. Fragments of conversation, nothing dramatic, but enough to build context, enough to hold a version of events that wasn't filtered through procedure. The senior attendant stepped forward again. This time she didn't go directly to him. She stopped 1 row behind, spoke quietly to a passenger, a routine check or something that looked like one, but her eyes moved differently, more scanning, less fixed. She was listening now, not just responding. The passenger she spoke to hesitated before answering. A small delay. Then, "It's fine." The word didn't carry confidence, just compliance. She nodded, moved on, didn't press, didn't verify, still following the structure that had already been set. When she reached his row again, she didn't stop immediately. She looked at the tray first. Longer this time, a second too long to ignore. That should have been enough. Again, but it was, because now it wasn't just about being right. It was about being consistent. And consistency had already chosen its side. She turned to him. "Sir, this has been documented," she said. Her tone was controlled, but lower than before, less public. "This behavior is being noted for review upon landing." A formal step, quietly delivered. He looked at her, no reaction, no visible change, just attention. "I understand," he said, nothing more, no defense, no explanation. The absence of resistance made it heavier, not lighter. There was nothing to push against, no argument to justify the escalation. Just a situation continuing forward on its own momentum. Behind her, someone shifted in their seat, leaning slightly into the aisle, watching more openly now. The balance in the cabin was changing, slowly, subtly, but noticeably. People weren't aligning as easily anymore. The earlier certainty that this was just a difficult passenger was starting to thin, not gone, but less solid. The senior attendant felt it, in the pauses, in the silence that followed her words. In the way no one immediately looked away anymore. Still, she nodded once, closed the interaction, and stepped back. No correction, no inspection, just continuation. The phone lowered slightly, recording still, capturing the end of that exchange. The framing, the language, the decision being reinforced again. The tray remained unchanged, unverified, but now it carried more than a smell. It carried documentation, language, labels. A narrative that had been written without ever addressing what had started it. And the longer it stayed that way, the harder it became to question. Because questioning it now would mean undoing more than a mistake. It would mean undoing a process. And no one had chosen that, not yet. The cabin had settled into something slower, not calm, just careful. Service was technically complete. Most trays had been collected, but not all. A few remained, left longer than usual. People weren't in a hurry to hand them back, not anymore. In his row, the tray stayed in place. Uncollected, unmoved. The lifted seal had dried slightly at the edge, curled just enough to make the opening more visible. The smell hadn't intensified, but it had become easier to recognize, familiar now, defined. A man 2 rows ahead raised his hand halfway, then lowered it again. He looked at his tray, then toward the aisle, then back down. He didn't press the call button, didn't speak, just sat there, waiting for something that didn't come. Across the aisle, the half-finished meal was still untouched. The man who had stopped eating earlier now had his arms crossed, not in protest, just closed. His eyes moved occasionally from his tray to the aisle to the front of the cabin, tracking something, trying to place it. Near the galley, the crew's movements had changed, less fluid, more deliberate. Trays were stacked with extra care. Conversations stayed shorter. Each exchange ended quicker than it began. The younger attendant paused once near the storage compartment. Her hand hovered near one of the containers. The lid wasn't fully secured. She noticed. That was clear. Her fingers moved slightly as if about to adjust it, then stopped. She glanced over her shoulder. The senior attendant was nearby, not watching directly, but close enough. The younger attendant pulled her hand back, closed nothing, said nothing, and walked away. A small moment, easy to miss, but it stayed. Another signal, left where it was. Back in the aisle, a passenger stood briefly, stretching, using the moment to look down toward his row. Not obvious, just a glance held a second too long. Then he sat back down. The awareness was spreading, quietly, without direction, without coordination, just individual observations that didn't yet connect into action. The senior attendant stepped out again, slower than before. Her eyes moved across the cabin, not checking service now, checking reactions. She paused beside the row behind him, not speaking, just standing there for a moment, listening. A low voice from the window seat. "I'm not eating this." Barely audible, the person beside them didn't respond, just looked straight ahead. Still, the senior attendant heard it. Her posture shifted slightly. A fraction, then returned. She moved forward, reached his row again. This time, she didn't speak immediately. She looked at the tray, longer than before, enough to register every detail, the lifted seal, the untouched surface, the distance he had kept from it that should have been the moment. The simplest point of correction. No audience needed. No explanation. Just action. Instead, she straightened, turned her attention to him. Her tone was lower now, less curt, but still aligned with what had already been set. "Sir, we need to clear your tray." A neutral request. Routine. He looked at it, then back at her. "I'd prefer you check it first." Same tone, same calm, nothing added, nothing removed. The request hadn't changed. Only the situation around it had. A pause followed, not long, but heavier than before. Because now the gap between what was being asked and what was being avoided was visible. She hesitated. It was brief, but real. Her eyes moved to the tray again, then toward the galley, then back to him. 3 points. One decision. Behind her, the first attendant was watching, not directly, but enough. The alignment still held, and breaking it now would mean acknowledging everything that had led here. She exhaled quietly. Then, "I'll have to remove it as is." Not firm, not confident. Just continued. He didn't move his hands, didn't stop her, didn't assist either, just watched. She reached forward, lifted the tray carefully. For the first time, it shifted position. The seal lifted slightly more as it tilted, a faint release. The smell became sharper, but only for a second, only for her. Her expression changed, just slightly, too quick for most to notice, but not invisible. She steadied the tray, adjusted her grip, and moved it away. No comment, no acknowledgement, just continuation. She walked it back toward the galley, slower than usual, her posture more controlled, as if holding something that required more attention than she wanted to show. Behind him, a voice whispered, "Did you see that?" Another voice answered, "She noticed." A pause, then silence again. The tray disappeared behind the curtain, out of sight, but not out of the moment, because now, for the first time, someone in authority had seen it up close and said nothing. The cabin felt different again, quieter. Not because people weren't talking, but because they were waiting for something that hadn't happened yet, but now felt closer and harder to avoid. The tray didn't come back, no replacement, no follow-up, nothing to close the gap it left behind, just absence. And that absence was noticeable, more than the tray itself had been. The space in front of him was empty now, clean, cleared, but unresolved. A few passengers tracked the movement when it disappeared behind the curtain, then looked back at their own trays. Some pushed them slightly away, not openly, just enough to create distance. A quiet adjustment. The cabin had gone still again, not silent, but holding something, waiting. Near the galley, the senior attendant stood with the first attendant. The tray was set down between them, not opened, not yet, just placed there. Both of them looked at it. Neither touched it. A few seconds passed. Then the first attendant spoke, low, controlled. "It's already documented." Not a question, a reminder. The senior attendant didn't respond immediately. Her eyes stayed on the tray. The lifted seal, more visible now, more difficult to ignore. She reached toward it, stopped. Her hand hovered there, just above the edge, then lowered without making contact. "We'll handle it after landing," she said, quiet, decided. The moment passed. Again. Behind them, the younger attendant slowed as she approached. She saw the tray, paused, looked between them. Something in her expression shifted, not confusion. Recognition. She didn't speak, didn't move closer, just stood there for a second, then turned away. The decision had already been made and reinforced. Back in the cabin, a soft chime sounded. Seatbelt sign remained off. No turbulence, just a system check, routine. But it drew attention. A few heads turned toward the front, then back again. The senior attendant stepped into the aisle once more. Her posture had changed. Less observational now. More procedural. She stopped beside his row, didn't look at the space where the tray had been, looked directly at him. "Sir," she said, "we need to address your behavior during service." The wording was heavier now, more formal, a step further than before. He looked at her, calm, unmoved. "What about it?" he asked. No edge, no resistance, just asking. A pause followed. She chose her words carefully. "You declined a standard meal and challenged crew instructions." A constructed version, clean, complete. Detached from the earlier moments, from the smell, from the tray, from the part that had been seen but not acknowledged, he held her gaze. "I asked for it to be checked." Same sentence, same tone, nothing added, nothing escalated. Behind her, someone shifted in their seat. A quiet exhale. Another voice, softer this time. "This isn't right." Barely audible, but present. The senior attendant heard it, didn't turn, didn't react, but it landed. Still, she continued. "As a result," she said, "this will be formally reported as non-compliance with cabin crew." There it was, the line crossed, not because of what happened, but because of how it had been defined. A formal classification, locked. She held her position, waiting for a response, a reaction, something to justify the step. He didn't give it. He nodded once, slow, understood. "All right," he said, nothing else, no defense, no pushback, just acceptance. And that made it heavier. Because there was nothing left to argue against. No resistance to validate the escalation, just silence. Behind him, a passenger leaned slightly into the aisle, watching more openly now. Another turned their head fully, no longer pretending not to notice. The balance had shifted again, not loudly, but clearly. The senior attendant felt it, in the eyes, in the pauses, in the lack of agreement that had once been easy. Still, she didn't step back, didn't reconsider. She nodded once, closed the interaction. Turned away, the decision stood, complete, unreversed. Back near the galley, the tray remained where it had been placed, still unopened, still carrying what had started all of this. The younger attendant passed by it again. This time she slowed more noticeably, looked at it, then at the senior attendant, a moment. Then she spoke quietly. "Should we check it?" The question hung there, simple, direct, late. The first attendant answered before the senior one could. "No." Immediate, flat. "It's already logged." The younger attendant didn't respond, just nodded and moved on. The senior attendant said nothing, did nothing, because saying something now would mean undoing everything that had been built on top of that first decision. And that was no longer simple, not after documentation, not after warnings, not after the cabin had been shaped around it. So the tray stayed closed, the issue stayed reframed, and the mistake became final, not because it had to be, but because it had been repeated one too many times to step back from it without consequence. The cabin didn't return to routine after that. It held, like something had been paused mid-motion and never released. No announcement explained it. No instruction changed. But the atmosphere had shifted into something quieter and more aware. People weren't just passengers now. They were watching, not openly, not together, but individually, each noticing small things they hadn't paid attention to before. Across the aisle, the man who had stopped eating earlier pushed his tray forward. Not toward the aisle, just away from himself, a small distance, enough to create space. He didn't call anyone, didn't ask for it to be taken, he just left it there, untouched now, matching the pattern that had already formed. 2 rows ahead, a woman peeled back the lid of her meal slightly, carefully, just enough to check. Her expression changed, barely, a tightening around the eyes. Then she closed it again, looked around. Not for help, but to see if anyone else had noticed. They had, but no one spoke, not yet. Near the middle of the cabin, the phone was still recording. Lower now, more discreet, but steady. It had shifted from capturing an incident to documenting a pattern. The aisle, the trays, the passengers who had stopped eating. The moments where crew walked past without stopping. Fragments, unconnected on their own, but together they began to say something. Near the galley, the younger attendant stood still for a moment longer than usual. Her hands rested lightly against the counter, not working, just paused, listening, watching. The tray was still there, unopened, placed slightly to the side now as if distance could reduce its relevance. It didn't. She looked at it. Then at the storage compartment behind it. One container door slightly misaligned, not fully shut. A small detail, but consistent. Her hand moved again. Slow. This time she touched the edge of the tray. Lightly. Tested the seal. It lifted with almost no resistance. She stopped, froze for a second, then pulled her hand back. As if contact alone had already said too much, she looked over her shoulder. The senior attendant was nearby, facing the aisle, still. Aware, their eyes met. A pause. Then the younger attendant spoke quietly. "It's not sealed properly." Not loud, not confrontational, just a fact. The senior attendant didn't respond immediately. Her posture didn't change, but something behind it did. A shift, subtle, measured. She turned, walked toward the tray, looked at it, really looked this time, the lifted edge, the looseness of the lid, the detail that had been present from the beginning. Ignored, dismissed, reframed, now unavoidable. She didn't touch it, didn't open it, just stood there, for a moment longer than before. Then she looked up, toward the cabin, passengers seated, some trays untouched, some partially opened. Eyes that didn't look away as quickly anymore. The pattern had spread, quietly, without permission, without announcement. Back in his seat, he remained still. No tray in front of him now, nothing to point at, nothing to defend. But the space itself, empty, had become its own signal, a reminder of where this started and how it had been handled. A man a few seats behind leaned forward slightly, lowered his voice. "I think he was right." A pause, then the response. "Yeah." Simple. No hesitation this time. No correction, just agreement. The shift had happened, not loud, not unanimous, but enough. The senior attendant heard it, didn't turn, didn't respond, but it landed, and it stayed, because now it wasn't just about one passenger or one tray. It was about the consistency of what people were seeing, and what they were no longer willing to ignore. She reached toward the tray again, stopped. Her hand hovered, just like before, the same moment, revisited, but heavier now, because this time she knew. Not suspected, not considered, knew, and still she didn't open it. Instead, she stepped back, turned slightly, and said quietly, "Leave it." Not to anyone in particular, but heard. The instructions settled, final. The younger attendant didn't respond, just nodded once, stepped away. The tray remained, closed, but no longer unconfirmed, just unacknowledged. Back in the cabin, more trays shifted, more food left untouched, more glances exchanged. The silence wasn't passive anymore. It was active, aware, holding something that hadn't been said out loud but didn't need to be. Because the truth had already started to show itself, in small ways, in quiet reactions, in decisions made by passengers who hadn't been part of the original moment but now understood it. And at the center of it all, a choice that could have been corrected early had grown into something else. Something visible, something shared. Something that no longer depended on being proven because it was already being seen. The aircraft felt different now, not because anything loud had happened, but because the quiet had changed shape. It wasn't passive anymore. It was structured, like the cabin had stopped being a space of service and started becoming a space of observation. At the front, the senior attendant stood near the interphone panel, still, listening. A short exchange came through from the cockpit. Her expression didn't shift much, but her posture tightened slightly. "Yes," she said after a pause, "we are aware." Another pause, then, "No, it is under control." The words were careful, not fully confident, but controlled enough to keep the system stable. She replaced the handset slowly, too slowly. Behind her, the first attendant watched without speaking. The younger attendant stayed further back now, near the galley threshold, not involved, but not detached either. Her eyes kept moving between the tray storage, the aisle, and the passengers who were no longer pretending not to notice things. In the cabin, a ripple of movement passed through without coordination. A passenger near the window quietly sealed their tray. Another left theirs untouched completely. No announcement triggered it, no instruction, just observation spreading sideways. The phone near the middle row was still recording, now angled slightly toward the front, capturing crew responses, timing, tone. The system had entered it, and that changed everything, because now it wasn't just a cabin issue. It had become reportable beyond the cabin. The senior attendant stepped into the aisle again, not quickly, not hesitantly, but differently than before, more measured, less certain in the direction, but more aware of being watched in every direction. She stopped beside his row, looked at the empty space where the tray had been, then at him. A brief pause, longer than earlier ones. Because now there was no object to frame the situation around, only the situation itself. "Sir," she said, "we will be completing a report upon landing." He nodded once, no change in expression, no resistance. "I understand." Two words, neutral, complete. Behind her, the cabin felt more alert, not tense in the emotional sense, but active. Passengers were no longer just listening. They were interpreting, reconstructing. A woman 2 rows back whispered, "They checked it right." No one answered immediately. Then a man beside her, "I don't think they did." That was enough, not confirmation, but doubt. And doubt spreads faster than certainty when nothing is said to stop it. The senior attendant heard fragments of it, not clearly, but enough. She didn't turn around, didn't address it. Instead, she continued the procedural path, because stepping outside it now would mean acknowledging what hadn't been acknowledged earlier. And that window had narrowed. Up front, the cockpit communication light blinked again. A second message, shorter, more direct. The senior attendant listened, nodded once. "Yes," she said again, "we will comply with ground instructions." Now it had moved beyond interpretation, beyond cabin authority. Something external had entered, not loudly, but structurally. The system had begun absorbing the incident, reframing it, stabilizing it, turning it into something that would be resolved after landing, not during it. Back in the cabin, the younger attendant passed by the galley storage again. This time she stopped, looked at the compartment where the tray had been kept. It was still slightly ajar. She reached out slowly and closed it properly, not forcefully, just correctly. A small correction, late but real. She paused after doing it, as if expecting it to change something. It didn't, because the issue had already moved past that point. The senior attendant returned to her position, her movements now fully procedural. No improvisation left, only structure. She addressed the cabin briefly, calm tone, measured words. "Please remain seated. We are completing the final phase of service." No mention of the incident, no reference to the tray, but everyone understood what it meant, because silence had already defined it. And now the aircraft began its descent cycle, subtle but noticeable. The angle shifted slightly. The cabin lights adjusted. Passengers felt it before they saw it. Arrival was coming. And with it closure, not resolution, closure. Back in his seat, he remained still. Hands relaxed, eyes forward, not tracking the attendants anymore, not tracking the cabin, just present. The absence in front of him was still there, but it no longer felt like nothing. It felt like evidence. Around him, the quiet had stabilized into something final, not because everything was resolved, but because everything had been moved into a different system. A system that would no longer be decided in the air. And as the plane descended slowly, the last chance to correct the original decision slipped away without ceremony. Not loudly, not dramatically, just officially. And that was what made it irreversible. The wheels touched down without ceremony, no turbulence, no dramatic shift, just a steady contact with the runway that felt smaller than everything that led to it. Inside the cabin, nothing changed immediately. People stayed seated. Seatbelts remained fastened, but the tension didn't leave, it just changed form. The senior attendant stood near the front, waiting for the aircraft to fully settle. Her posture was correct, professional, but there was a stillness now that wasn't part of procedure. It came from everything that had already been decided before landing, a decision that no longer belonged to her alone. The cockpit light blinked once, then stopped. A final internal confirmation passed through the system. She listened, nodded once. "Understood," she said quietly. No announcement followed. None was needed. The doors were not opened yet, but the outcome had already begun moving outside the aircraft, not loudly, not visibly, just structurally. In the cabin, passengers remained unusually quiet, not obedient, not tense, just aware that something had shifted into a phase where their input no longer mattered. The phone that had been recording earlier lowered. The screen went dark, but the memory of what it captured stayed. The man in the middle rows looked at his tray again, still untouched. He didn't move it, didn't call for it, just stared at it for a moment longer than necessary, then looked away. The younger attendant stood near the galley, hands folded loosely. She wasn't speaking now, not because she was told not to, but because there was nothing left that needed to be said. The first attendant remained near the side wall, still, quiet, watching the aisle more than the passengers, not engaged anymore. Just present in the aftermath of decisions she no longer controlled. The senior attendant finally moved, not toward him, not toward the cabin, but toward the interphone panel one last time. A short exchange, minimal words, then she stepped back. That was it. No correction, no reversal, just confirmation that the process had transitioned fully out of her hands. The aircraft door mechanism engaged. A sound subtle enough that most passengers wouldn't notice it consciously, but enough to signal that everything was now external. Ground responsibility, terminal systems, reports that would not be shaped by cabin perception anymore. The cabin pressure of authority loosened slightly, not relief, just transfer, and in that transfer something settled. In his row he remained seated, still calm, still composed, no change in posture, no reaction to the shift happening around him. There was nothing to celebrate, nothing to perform, because the outcome wasn't arriving in a dramatic moment. It was arriving as process, slow, administrative, final in a way that didn't require acknowledgement. The senior attendant walked past his row one last time. She didn't stop, didn't look directly at him this time, but her pace slowed just slightly as she passed. A fraction, almost invisible, then she continued forward. The door opened. Cold air from the bridge entered the cabin. Passengers began to move, slowly at first, then in waves, but the structure of the moment had already changed. This wasn't resolution through confrontation. It was resolution through system alignment, and in that system, decisions don't get undone in the air. They get processed on the ground. He stood only when the aisle cleared enough. No urgency, no delay, just timing. As he stepped forward, no one stopped him. No one challenged him, not anymore. Because the narrative that had been built around him during the flight had already begun to dissolve under procedures that didn't rely on it. At the front, the senior attendant watched the flow of passengers disembarking. Her expression remained controlled, but there was something quieter beneath it now. Not regret spoken aloud, not acknowledgement, just awareness that a decision made too early had carried farther than intended, and could no longer be contained within the space it was made in. He reached the exit point, paused briefly, not for attention, not for effect, just transition, then stepped out. No confrontation followed, no words exchanged, no final correction in the moment itself, because the correction had already happened elsewhere. In reports, in logs, in systems that don't need silence to agree. And as he disappeared into the jet bridge, the cabin behind him continued emptying, calmly, routinely, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. But the structure of what did happen was already permanent, not because it was loud, but because it was decided early and never reversed when it still could have been.